Historiography and the Promise Plan, the tools, rules, and architecture of biblical historical inquiry. The Christian faith makes a distinctive and inherently scandalous claim among the world's religions. Its theological and saving validity rests upon the concrete historicity of redemptive events within the space-time continuum, culminating in the bodily resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. As the Apostle Paul emphatically states in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 14, "If Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain." This historical grounding invites rigorous scrutiny. Alternative approaches to history, whether postmodern skepticism that treats all history as a subjective construct, radical critical reconstructions that dissolve the resurrection into symbol or myth, or non-evangelical frameworks that prioritize naturalistic explanations, frequently challenge the accessibility of objective truth behind the biblical witness. Within Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s Promise Plan framework, however, historiography is not an extraneous secular discipline, but an essential dimension of God's organic, progressive revelation. History serves as the primary theater of Yahweh's covenantal faithfulness, tracing the single unified divine purpose from creation through Israel to its eschatological fulfillment in the Messiah. The biblical authors composed their works within a distinct Hebraic cognitive environment that viewed history as teleological and covenantal rather than cyclical or detached. Patriarchal narratives, the Exodus confession in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 5 through 9, the Deuteronomistic history, and the prophetic interpretation of exile and return exemplify a historiography rooted in communal memory, eyewitness testimony, and divine intervention in verifiable events. This essay recovers a robust historiographical method aligned with critical realism. Drawing upon the methodological frameworks of scholars such as Gary R. Habermas and Michael R. Licona, it subordinates these tools to the final canonical form of Scripture and the text-immanent logic of the Promise Plan. In this integrative approach, the historian's tools, primary and secondary sources, and rules, criteria of authenticity and inference to the best explanation, serve the organic architecture of redemption rather than fragmenting it. This affirms an adequately certain historical foundation for the Promise Plan's culmination while avoiding both Enlightenment positivism and postmodern relativism. Section 1. The Epistemological Foundation, Critical Realism and the Hebraic Worldview. Historians must first establish whether the past is knowable. Critical realism charts a measured course between naive positivism, which demands unattainable mathematical certainty, and radical skepticism, which renders all historical knowledge subjective. It acknowledges the fragmentary nature of ancient sources and the interpreter's subjective horizon of biases, yet maintains a correspondence theory of truth. Historical descriptions can adequately correspond to actual events through inductive reasoning and abduction, inference to the best explanation. This epistemological posture aligns profoundly with the Hebraic cognitive environment. For the biblical writers, truth, emeth, was fundamentally relational and historical, grounded in Yahweh's covenantal reliability as celebrated in historical psalms such as Psalms 78, 105, and 106. The Toledot structure of Genesis and the prophetic rereading of Israel's story reflect a progressive, organic historiography that documents the Promise Plan's unfolding amid the fractures of the three compounding cosmic rebellions. Eden in Genesis chapter 3, the transgression of the Watchers in Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 through 4, and the disinheritance of the nations at Babel in Genesis chapter 11 and Deuteronomy chapter 32 verses 8 and 9. Unlike certain expressions of classical dispensationalism that may impose sharp administrative discontinuities, or forms of covenant theology that risk spiritualizing concrete historical promises, the Promise Plan framework preserves the historical and future-oriented character of God's commitments to ethnic Israel within the one people of God, as Romans chapter 11 verses 25 through 29 makes clear. Critical realism thus supplies the philosophical architecture best suited to honor Scripture's own claims regarding divine action in verifiable history. Section 2. The Tools of Historical Research, Sources and Canonical Memory. Historians rely primarily on primary sources, materials generated near the time of the events, and secondary sources that offer later interpretations. In New Testament studies, the Pauline epistles and canonical gospels stand as vital primary literary sources, supplemented by non-literary remains such as archaeological artifacts and oral tradition. Luke's prologue in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, explicitly models this process, compiling accounts handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses, so that readers might know the certainty as philion of the events. This concern for verifiable covenantal memory resonates directly with the Promise Plan's emphasis on historical continuity across the canon. In the low-literacy ancient Mediterranean context, oral tradition functioned as a sophisticated mechanism for preserving communal memory when anchored in trustworthy eyewitnesses. While vulnerable to legendary accretion, the biblical canon demonstrates careful stewardship of such tradition, building progressively across literary units while preserving the organic unity of revelation. Section 3. The Rules of Historiography, Criteria of Authenticity in Canonical Context. Once sources are gathered, historians apply heuristic criteria of authenticity to assess probability. These include early and eyewitness testimony, such as the pre-Pauline Creed in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 7, datable to within a few years of the crucifixion. Multiple independent attestation, convergence across independent traditions like Paul and Mark, strengthens confidence. The criterion of embarrassment highlights details unlikely to be fabricated, such as women as the first witnesses to the empty tomb. Enemy attestation and coherence with an established core of facts further corroborate key events. These criteria function most fruitfully as subordinate heuristic tools rather than autonomous arbiters that risk fragmenting the canonical text. When applied with awareness of potential modern biases and in service to the final canonical form, they support the Promise Plan's progressive revelation and the organic harmony of Scripture. Section 4. Inference to the best explanation, the resurrection as historical climax. Application of the tools and rules yields a minimal set of historical facts widely acknowledged: Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion, the disciples' transformative experiences leading them to proclaim his resurrection, the empty tomb, and the conversion of hostile witnesses such as Saul of Tarsus. Naturalistic alternatives, body theft, group hallucination, swoon theory, or legend development, fail to explain the full range of data. The bodily resurrection hypothesis, by contrast, provides the most comprehensive and coherent account, including the remarkable theological mutation within first-century Jewish monotheism. Section 5. Historiography in the service of the Promise Plan. This historical validation carries profound theological significance. The Promise Plan traces God's single unified redemptive purpose to reverse the cosmic rebellions, restore humanity's ontological royal priestly vocation within the cosmic temple, and reclaim the disinherited nations. Jesus, the faithful Israelite and last Adam, fulfills the Abrahamic, Davidic, and New Covenant promises through his perfect covenantal obedience, vicarious death, and vindicating resurrection. His historically verifiable resurrection defeats the principalities and powers, inaugurates the New Covenant, and secures the irrevocable nature of God's concrete, future-oriented promises to ethnic Israel, as Romans chapter 11, verses 17 through 29 affirms. Gentiles are graciously grafted into Israel's nourishing root without replacement or annulment of those promises. Rigorous historiography thus serves not merely to defend isolated facts, but to illuminate the organic architecture of redemption. The Messiah's life, death, and resurrection constitute the decisive turning point in the Promise Plan, advancing it toward the restoration of the cosmic temple and the new creation. Conclusion. A disciplined historiographical method grounded in critical realism and the Hebraic cognitive environment enables biblical theology to navigate between fideism and skepticism. When the historian's tools and rules are subordinated to the canonical witness and governed by the Promise Plan, they confirm the bodily resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth as the best explanation of the evidence and the eschatological climax of God's redemptive narrative. In this way, historical inquiry serves the organic unity and progressive revelation of Scripture. It equips the Church to proclaim confidently that Yahweh has acted decisively in history to redeem his one people, Jew and Gentile together, and to restore the cosmic temple. This integrative model also opens avenues for further research, strengthening both academic discourse and ecclesial formation.